All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Dave Tell. I think I've met most, but not all of you. I'm a co-director of the Institute for the Digital Research in the Humanities, as well as a professor in communication studies. And on behalf of the IDRH and on behalf of the Center for Teaching Excellence, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the keynote presentation of our 2022 Digital Jumpstart workshops. As I said in the panel on Clio earlier today, and as I said again in the panel presentation, the Digital Jumpstart workshops, I think, are the coolest thing we're doing this year at the IDRH. I think that because I think they can have the largest impact on our university, because we are, in a sense, trying to prepare the teachers, to teach the teachers how to get digital tools into the classroom. And so when we were thinking about who we would like to sort of anchor 2 days of workshops, Dr. Ross's name came quickly to mind, because she is literally written the book on how to use digital humanities in the classroom. So before I introduce her, let me encourage you, you know what, we've gone through 3 workshops already. I think off the top of my head, we have 4 more tomorrow. So I encourage you to check out the options tomorrow. They include a workshop on Twine, a workshop on podcasting, a workshop on Scalar with Professor John Randolph from the University of Illinois. We're very grateful that John's here with us. And a workshop on mapping using StoryMaps.js. So lots of options tomorrow. But before we get to tomorrow, we have today. So let me introduce Dr. Shawna Ross. Dr. Ross is an associate professor of English at Texas A&M University, where she specializes in modernism and the digital humanities. Although Dr. Ross and I did not meet each other until today, we have figured out that we share some curious history. So Dr. Ross was starting her graduate work in the Penn State English department if you've been to Penn State, in Burroughs Hall, the same year I was finishing my graduate work in the communication department in the Sparks building, right? And so those 2 buildings are right across the flower bed from each other.
Like Spider-Man.
And as Dr. Ross pointed out, I said we might have met at a coffee shop, and she pointed out, well, actually, we probably met at Zeno's, which is the bar right down the street from both of those buildings. And it's probably true. And then where else? Like Knoxville.
Yeah, Knoxville.
We also share Knoxville. We were also both in Knoxville in 1998 when the University of Tennessee Volunteers last won the national championship. And Dr. Ross and I were both cheering for UT this past Saturday when they knocked off a team we won't mention. In 2016, Dr. Ross published Reading Modernism with Machines. It's a thing. She co-edited that volume with James O'Sullivan, and in 2017, the very next year, she published Using Digital Humanities in the Classroom, co-written with Claire Battershill. This book is rooted in the day-to-day experience of teaching, and it's written for those without specialist technical knowledge, and it has become the go-to guide to using digital humanities tools and resources in the classroom. I think you can see why we invited her to be with us. Her talk today is titled Rethinking the Synchronic Classroom, Concepts and Templates for Balancing the Analog and the Digital in Course Construction. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Shawna Ross. And as she comes up here, let me just encourage you, there's plenty of food back there. Like, get food, like, very informal. Please, it's paid for. Please eat it.
All right, just checking the chat. Oh, just checking the chat. I'm sure you're up to date. Okay, so first of all, if you want to access course materials, those seen here, the script for this talk, the slides, as well as a link to a PDF of the book, the first edition of Using DH in the Classroom. So if you want to read it, go ahead and go there, because some of the questions in the last session about resistance, about accessibility and things, if you're interested, you might want to give that a look. So those are some of your questions. I also wanted to point out, if you go to teachdh.com, you can access some other free materials, because I only want to point you to the things that you don't have to pay for. So this is, if you just start entering a question in a toolbar, it'll start dynamically generating some results for you. But if you want some more structured information, you can go to the link to the first web companion, which was made in Scalar. And some of the resources that we have in that Scalar site are sample assignment sheets, sample activities, sample tutorials, like workshop slides that kind of go click by click to teach students how to use some of these basic tools. So please feel free to go and use all of those things. All right, just make sure again. Anyone in the chat? Okay, excellent. So again, those materials are tinyurl.com/RossKansas. I can't believe I didn't put that on the slide. I apologize for that. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about context. So this project came out of trying to deal with the pedagogical consequences of COVID-19. And as Claire and I were writing the second edition of Digital Humanities in the Classroom, we were trying to run through those consequences. And I had some unfinished business with that that I want to address today. And then I'll go to some broader concepts that should, I hope, underpin your decisions about using digital pedagogy, because you always want to do so mindfully. We can bring joy and curiosity with our tools, but just knowing kind of a few things to keep in mind will prevent you from that moment where you're like, oh no, I just spent 2 weeks in this classroom and I'm still sort of unclear about what the objectives are myself. And then finally, at the end, I'm going to show some templates for course design that show how you can incorporate DH projects in a way that is not going to make you want to tear your hair out or make your students rebel. Okay, so thank you again for inviting me to this talk, Dave, and everybody at the IDRH, and apparently the CTE, which I've been hearing a lot about. Sounds like they're doing great work. Online teaching is no longer an unusual teaching experience. As COVID-19, first detected in December 2019, spread alarmingly over the first few months of 2020, more and more classes shifted online, interrupting the usual progress of winter quarters and spring semesters around the world. By March, resistance to acknowledging the extent of the pandemic became impossible, and most universities and schools internationally were forced to shutter almost overnight until further notice. Many instructors learned of the closure on a Friday and were teaching online the next Monday, while their slightly luckier counterparts had spring break in between. A feature on panic goji aired on National Public Radio and captured instructors' confusion and anxiety at that moment. Interviews with Robin DeRosa and Shawna Morris emphasized that quickly transitioning to online platforms required a great deal of compassion towards students and towards ourselves. Meanwhile, students struggled to access books and have reliable Wi-Fi connections, and instructors struggled to create a best practices learning experience, with both groups battling the physical, emotional, and practical fallout of the global pandemic. Over subsequent semesters, we instructors charted our new paths into teaching through virtual means. Sometimes we would craft a fully asynchronous class, taking advantage of the then current default model of online education that allowed you to create content in advance, and then students would access that content at their own pace. The convenience of a fully asynchronous course made it attractive to many instructors and students, especially independent learners and those juggling family and other job commitments. But sometimes we would design a fully synchronous class that relied on live video conferencing. This model was attractive because it seemed intuitively to be the closest possible equivalent for a traditional class. It did not have to require the effort of completely reimagining your course structure from the ground up. But for another class, we might have designed a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous elements that maximize the efficiencies of asynchronous delivery while not sacrificing the communal engagement and discursive spontaneity of synchronous delivery. 2.5 years later, COVID is largely viewed by college administrators in the rearview mirror, a temporary anomaly that no longer needs to be factored into scheduling decisions. But as my collaborator Claire Battersall and I discussed in summer 2020, that does not mean that we have to forget what we learned from online instruction. As we prepared the second edition of Teaching DH, we added a chapter on online teaching. we became more and more certain that our novel experiences teaching during a pandemic, as upsetting and as unwilling as they were at times, had given us an opportunity to consider online pedagogy as an intentional form, from panic-gogy to intentional pedagogy. What lessons did we learn that could serve our teaching in the future, no matter the mode of delivery? The first task, before sifting through whatever memories remain of course design over the last 36 months or so, is to confront and hopefully overturn any lingering negative associations and attitudes that led many instructors in the past to turn their nose up at online teaching and just kind of surviving. We were in survival mode until we could return to face-to-face instruction. Some of the sources behind these attitudes were identified by rhetorician and digital humanities scholar Lee Scalart-Bissett in a piece for the Chronicle of Higher Ed. And this is linked to in the related links document if you're accessing the Google Drive. Published in the Chronicle in July 2020, the article observes, quote, particularly in the humanities, the attitude was and remains that it was something to be avoided at all costs. Online courses were at best a way to offer cheap gen ed courses over the summer, and at worst, part of the neoliberal agenda to defund the humanities and standardize the curriculum toward tenure-destroying ends. Meanwhile, to continue from Lee Scalart-Bissett, meanwhile, the institutions that have developed the most robust online offerings, to wit, community colleges and regional comprehensives, aren't the ones we typically look for leadership in the humanities, with the result that teachers in other kinds of institutions disregard their experience and expertise because their perceived lack of status. And finally, Lee tells us, broadly speaking, because it is contingent instructors who teach online and do it well, there are few resources to turn to from learning from them about what they're doing so well in online teaching. Bissett implies no criticism of these adjunct faculty experts. They're too busy, they're not compensated enough to do this extra labor of creating handy guides for us. So there's no judgment there. But that doesn't mean there's maybe room for someone else to step in. So we asked ourselves, maybe we could explain, well, I tasked myself with thinking, what does digital humanities pedagogy offer any teacher? Aside from anything that actually looks like digital humanities, there are things that we can offer them. And they are, well, actually, I wasn't going to go quite there yet, excuse me. Sorry, I wanted to give a little bit more context. All right, so as strange as it might sound, Claire and I had not talked about online teaching in our first edition because digital pedagogy is distinct from online teaching. Back in 2016, when MOOCs, massively open online classes, seemed to pose an existential threat to university education as we knew it, many digital humanities scholars were fearful that aligning too closely with online teaching would decenter their research and cause misunderstanding about the service commitments of the field. Moreover, online teaching is a subject of considerable research all its own, right? I'm not going to go poach somebody's field and be like, there's no research in this, because obviously they have. But of course, it should not be conflated with digital pedagogy, which in those pre-COVID days was rooted primarily in a traditional classroom environment. Distance learning has a long history of its own, beginning with the development of correspondence courses by mail in the mid-19th century. By contrast, digital humanities came of age at the dawn of this century and evolved out of humanities computing established in the 1960s. And whereas distance learning adopts digital platforms primarily for reasons of cost and practicality and develops best practices for applying to any discipline, humanities, non-humanities, it's supposed to, right, there's a little bit of magic in that, right? So that's what it strives to do. But digital humanities instructors adopt digital tools for more specific aims to help students explore humanities concepts and use discipline-specific knowledges and methods to become more critically aware of the impact that digital technologies have on their lives. In the process of devising pedagogical processes to meet these aims, digital humanists created a suite of tools and scholarship on teaching that can be applied by any instructor who's teaching an online course or wants to use a digital tool or platform in a face-to-face class. So essentially, I realized we could reframe the history of digital humanities scholarship as a set of resources that we could offer any teachers. So ideas for crafting born digital course websites, reading, activity, and assignments, methods for maximizing privacy, security, and accessibility in online environments, values for deciding what to prioritize, such as digital literacy, and what to do and what to let go during challenging situations, strategies for preventing or overcoming technical problems, and critical approaches to the uses of technological tools and infrastructures, no matter the content delivery format. In my own case, I had been fortunate because I felt like I had enough grasp on that because I was writing the book, but that's just dumb luck, right? So in subsequent semesters, I wanted something better to guide me as I attempted to blend the synchronous and asynchronous into a class that wasn't pretending to be face-to-face, but still felt like it was unfolding in real time and supported meaningful peer engagement and student-teacher interaction. The something that I needed, my North Star, that I could refer all decisions to, was the list of course objectives. That mandatory syllabus feature I had all too often dismissed as a bureaucratic requirement, instead of consciously grasping it as a heuristic that would minimize my hesitation and maximize my confidence while I made decisions about course design. One substitute for such a heuristic is trial and error, iteration, making adjustments semester by semester until you feel like a course is working. But in the whiplash of COVID-era teaching, that was a luxury we did not have. How nice would it be, I thought to myself, to have a series of templates, each one designed for a particular type of course, that each embodied a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous elements. Such templates would have the additional advantage of offering various options for comfortably incorporating digital pedagogy elements into any class. And by comfortably, I mean incorporating resources, activities, assignments, and communications platforms, not for their own sakes, but for furthering course objectives, and contributing to a well-balanced class that nurtures community and active learning without exhausting the teacher or the students, or losing sight of your discipline's characteristic insights and methodologies. As I brainstormed ways to create templates in the least amount of time, I'm all for saving labor, I jettisoned the idea of matching templates to course types because that would conform too much to my pre-existing beliefs about what a course is supposed to look like. So could it be possible, I asked myself, to formalize a procedure for experimenting with course templates without overdetermination, relying on that kind of that Benjaminian angel of history, right? The big dark cloud of your past decisions that's always roiling towards you, right? So like, how can I start afresh? Other challenges in this process included schematizing the way of selecting asynchronous elements and synchronous elements, ones where you're deploying it at the same time, usually face-to-face versus asynchronously. And then how could you visualize the way of mixing and matching these things? So it was a question of how do I make this thing something to look at? Making the matter more complicated, decisions related about how best to visualize the process of course design depend partly on individual preferences. How much direction will you tolerate? You specifically, not me. How many dimensions of course planning are you willing to be flexible about? Do you invite serendipity into your course processes? These difficulties made me relegate the idea to the back burner until the second edition of the book had already come out. So thank you for this opportunity, Dave, because I was able to dust it off and be like, I'm gonna go get that thing. All right. So to improve our chances of finding a scheme that helps you specifically, I'll be sharing these models for course design in two ways, a straightforward way and a more interactive way. The straightforward way is a worksheet that lists options for various course elements like lectures, discussions, projects, office hours, with each option being rated for its likely level of student engagement and of teacher preparation. You then score yourself using a simplified rating system to see if such a course design might set you up for exhausting yourself or disengaging your students. The interactive way consists of a randomized course generator that I've assembled and put online. With this generator, you can click through endless permutations of course elements selected randomly until you like it, or you can click through elements to preserve them through the next process of randomization until you get what you like. So the last half of the class is actually, now that you're like, that's so interesting, I'm going to be like, I'm not talking about that for the next 10 minutes. But yeah, sorry, concepts first, and then the tool. Okay. All right, so before I get to the worksheet and the randomizer, I'm going to share some concepts that will guide how you interact with that worksheet and the generator, right? Tools are never self-explanatory. They are never self-contained, right? They always need contextualization and that humanist, quality of evaluation that we're all so good at, presumably. All right, so of these concepts, chief among them is the blending of synchronous and asynchronous elements. Asynchronous meaning not necessarily the student or the teacher gets to determine exactly when something's going to happen, but there's some kind of flexibility. Maybe it happens earlier than normal. Maybe it happens later than normal. It just means that you have the ability to control when something happens to a greater degree. I realized that our experiences with emergency online teaching could be applied to decoupling traditional associations that pair synchronicity with face-to-face teaching and asynchronicity with online teaching. Related assumptions take it as a given that remote learning is more technology intensive, and that asynchronous course elements are done by one student working solo, an independent learner, right? Someone who doesn't like social learning is the ideal student for asynchronous delivery, supposedly. During COVID, best practice online courses took good advantage of these assumptions to incorporate these two different kinds of elements to appeal to both kinds of learner, right? Independent learners and social learners during a moment of historical crisis. But now that we're mostly teaching in person again, it's important to recognize that these sets of assumptions conflate time with place, and they no longer serve a reality in which tools for real-time virtual collaboration are, when used mindfully, largely accessible to anybody who is in a university environment. Rejecting these assumptions allows you to choose freely which parts of your class are facilitated by analog means or digital means, which are facilitated by a mixture of the two. If you carry this principle further, you can consciously assemble elements of your course without taking it for granted that, for instance, group discussion must be face-to-face, or student feedback must be asynchronous, or an essay or exam has to be solo. If you reject these assumptions, you can also deliberately choose which course components will unfold in real time and which can or should be done asynchronously in order to improve student learning. In some cases, such as collaborative document authorship, computer-assisted real-time options are superior to analog ones, fight me. In other cases, such as providing feedback to students via video or audio clip, asynchronous computer-assisted options can save instructors time. Of course, saving time won't happen automatically. Sometimes you have to put time into learning a new process before it becomes the most efficient option for you. Sometimes teaching a DH assignment will require you to provide more detailed instructions in office hours consultations than you would for a typical assignment, but the trade-off will be that grading will go faster. And sometimes a chalkboard will actually take your class where it needs to go rather than some fancy mind mapping software. My point is that during class design, we can weigh these options, try to balance the pros and cons of any of these decisions to maximize benefits students can derive from adding digital elements to your class without adding unnecessary effort or corrosive anxiety, right? Those moments where your students feel disempowered. Unfortunately, these kind of negotiations can seem interminable. Uncertainty about which platform or tool can be best may be overwhelming. It can make the difference between whether you're willing to make the leap or feel that the risk isn't worth it. In the second edition of Using DH in the Classroom, Claire and I added a dozen tables, like lots and lots of things saying, here's what you want to do, here's the software, and here's why, and here's how much it'll cost, and here's how much effort it takes to learn it. So again, I don't know how to get you this one for free. I'd feel bad if I gave you the brand new one because it was just published in April, but I did give you the free one on the last. So anyway, if you're able to get your hands on a copy of that, it is on Russian pirating sites. Should I be saying this in a recording? Yeah. Okay. If you're somehow able to get a copy of this, we do have like straightforward recommendations. If your problem is, well, I just don't know which tool to use, because that's a very understandable problem to have. But long before you can tackle the issue of tool selection, you need to decide what parts of your class are going to be digital. A good balance of analog and digital elements will allow you to take advantage of the technological affordances of software while making room for the tactile and empathetic transactions of hands-on learning and in-person discussion. A good balance will also ensure that social learners and independent learners alike will have some opportunities both to work in their comfort zone and then be pushed to work outside of it, right? You don't want either one of those groups feeling like this course is great for me and another being completely alienated. A good balance of the digital and analog will also ensure that any DH pedagogy experience will enhance your course objectives, content-related goals, and disciplinary practices. It shouldn't be a distraction, right? You know, if you think really hard about, well, why am I doing this? It's always going to seem very natural. Last but not least, a good balance will save you time where you can without sacrificing student accomplishments. Sometimes these savings in time are net gains, like when an LMS, such as Canvas, adds a digital annotation tool and lets you comment on student drafts at a rate of the average typewriter 40 words a minute, instead of the average writing by hand, which is 13 words a minute. I mean, that's a pretty good gain, I think. Even when there's no net gain of time saved, you can still receive the subjective rewards of consciously redirecting your efforts so they increase your satisfaction. So remember that flaw I identified in the assumption that synchronous is face-to-face, asynchronous is digital. It conflates time with place. The ability to reallocate the time and place associated with a given task, either your task or the student's task, allow you to reclassify something you do synchronously as asynchronous, something that's usually independent as collaborative, something that is face-to-face is virtual, gives you greater control over your labor, right? Because these personal preferences we have they're not nothing, right? You know, no student needs everything from you, right? And they're going to get best from you what you like best as well, right? So like trying to figure out like, how can we say, yeah, I want to save my time, and yeah, I want to use the technologies I like, but I'm going to do it in a way that helps students, so I don't have to feel bad about that. For instance, with many digital humanities assignments, your effort will be skewed chronologically. The bulk of your time will happen beforehand. The bulk of your effort will be spent beforehand as you pair course objectives with tools, train yourself in the technology, and prepare course materials. Your time may be a bit more flexible when the students are actually starting to engage with the tool and you're just kind of waiting to see if they show up at office hours with a problem or not. And you can also use group work so that they're asking each other first rather than yourself. And then grading, again, if you have a good rubric, very often you can schematize that in a way that makes students really comfortable. Because like very often when humanities people, we see overly schematized ideas, we're like, this isn't true to life. Right? There are exceptions, you know, this excludes people, and that is a right impulse to make for sure. But the thing about rubrics digital projects is it helps student buy-in because they aren't thinking, I'm going to fail. You know, and our poor students have been so conditioned to care just about the grade and just about spitting something out to you that a rubric is a great way to try to bypass those anxieties. So I'm a convert to rubrics. I used to think they were just assessment kind of lingo, whatever. And now I realize that they make my students feel really good. And you can make them with them too. You know, if you co-edit your rubrics with your students before they turn their assignments in, they have helped decided what they themselves are going to get graded on. Right. All right, sorry, digression. Where was I? Yeah, so blah, 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 blah. That was a different example. That was good. I'll just skip that. Okay. Ultimately, regardless of institutional policies towards hybrid teaching or online teaching post-COVID, maintaining a keen awareness of the digital means available to you for managing course resources, student work, collaboration, communication, and feedback can help you redirect your efforts in ways that contribute to your satisfaction and allow for digital humanities experimentation. So to summarize, redirecting your efforts can happen if we just jettison our expectations about the proper time, place, and means for each element of course design. Intentionally tailoring your new choices to match the amount of time and resources you can spend on learning new technologies and workflows will allow you to benefit from existing, streamlined, tried and true methods while indulging in the risks and rewards of pedagogical experimentation. To ensure that these goals are also serving the interests of your student body and your course objectives, I have the following course principles to think about. First of all, promote active learning. Active learning comes from constructivist learning theory, which holds that individuals learn through building their own knowledge, connecting new ideas and experiences to existing knowledge and experiences to form new or enhanced understanding. Traditionally, examples of such active learning would include field trips, hands-on learning, and internships. But COVID has kind of made me try to reframe active learning, not in terms of what we can do with face-to-face activities, which are often so much fun, but in terms of what we can do to help students take responsibility for their learning and connect it to their lives. So first of all, share with your students why you've made the choices you've made. Get meta with them and be like, here as an educator, this is why I'm doing this. It's not arbitrary. It's not because someone told me to do it. Here's my rationale. Then encourage students to be responsible for their learning and reflect explicitly on what they're learning by repeatedly calling for and rewarding creative thinking, problem solving, and decision making. Basically, if you want students to do it, you got to give them points. You know, like put points to everything because they deserve those points, right? They like those points. Okay. How do I go backwards on this guy? Okay. Cool. All right. That's weird. There we go. To encourage this kind of action of reflection over acquisition, have fewer and shorter lectures in favor of Socratic discussions, have open-ended questions on exams and quizzes, customizable assignments that let students kind of chase their dreams, and first-person reflection papers accompanying a major assignment, or perhaps having a large global self-assessment at the end of the semester. My favorite form of this is an artist statement. So that way, when they do their DH project, they're allowed to think of themselves not just as a technician, but as somebody who has an artist's approach to the content that they have represented in a new visual, in a new digital means, right? So that's why I asked them, what's your artist statement here? And again, give them points. They deserve points if you're asking them to do something. Organize your course sessions by questions instead of themes, and then allow student back channel chat through social annotation and group chat. The next concept is more is not more. Designate some of your teaching time to increasing student contact with yourself and their peers, rather than incorporating new content. You might have to sacrifice some portion of the class, a text, a unit, a concept, an assignment, to recover that time for offering more feedback, building community, and teaching students how to use a particular tool or method that the class depends on. If you can leave it out, leave it out. To gauge whether you've over-invested in content over contact, use elements viewing trackers such as Canvas Analytics. So I understand you guys are starting to transition to Canvas. There's a little flag on the right-hand menu of instructor view that says Analytics. You can see how students have been engaging or not with their materials. It can be scary. If the results are the results are disappointing, shorten your materials, use quizzes or discussion materials to map student engagement in a different way, or ask students plainly if there's a format or delivery mode problem that's causing them not to engage with it. Obviously, you don't have to do it each individual student once if you try to get a class consensus. In general, if you supplement a face-to-face class with audio lectures, podcasts, screencasts, slideshows, or video, they should be shorter than normal in-person lecturing, because all of that, even whether it's just a still image on a slide, or it's the cadence of your voice, or having an object, a technical object that they're pressing start and play, that's more cognitive load on them. So you have to reduce the amount of content on there to respect that extra work they're doing to access the stuff. Okay, let's see. For lower division courses, for example, I like doing a greater number of shorter podcasts or lectures because you've got more non-majors. Whereas if I've got a class that's upper division, it's mostly majors, I'll allow myself to do more exploratory, ruminative, and therefore longer podcasts. Nonetheless, podcasts and screencasts, just industry standard, should not exceed between 15 and 16 minutes a week. Slideshows should normally be capped between 25 and 35 slides. This is smart business and social scientist people who have done this research. That's where these numbers are coming from. And any blog style prose that you give them should be about 400 to 600 words with a maximum of 1,000 words. There are other guidelines for social media production that I've linked to here. And again, they're backed with many, many studies. So using those will help to make sure that you're not asking students to engage with things in a way that totally jars with their experiences with digital content elsewhere. Reducing the amount of time, reducing the amount of content you create or ask your students to create goes hand in hand with the next principle: elevate your formats, because the time you save from overproducing can be usefully applied to making your files more accessible. Redundancy, that is providing multiple file formats for materials whenever possible, maximizes the chances that students will be able to use the devices and perhaps assistive technologies that they already have. It can also serve you in the same way as backing up files. So for instance, you go into a new classroom and it does not have PowerPoint and that's all you have. Well, what if you also had it in Google Slides format? You've just saved yourself a lot of pain. Redundancy also helps you when your students are branching out and using new technologies. It seems like a contradiction to say that repetition is the key to diversification, but I really feel like it's the truth because it helps to build student memory and confidence. Make sure to repeat your explanations and instructions, just as you provide duplicate files, right? It's the same idea, right, of redundancy. This kind of repetition benefits both neurotypical and neurodivergent students. And in my experience, it saves me some of the read the syllabus, right? Some of those moments where you're like, man, I've been asked the same question and I spent so much time on the beautiful syllabus. And so that helps to reduce that kind of not very satisfying engagement with students. Once you've uploaded these materials to your course website or LMS shell or an email to your students, make sure you test them on your smartphone. We kind of talked about this, like Shawna was saying, you would be amazed how many students are only accessing your course website on a phone. There might be entire menus or entire pieces of functionality that they cannot get to depending on different mobile browsers. And I know that sounds terrible, but it's really worth it. Check it on Safari, check it on mobile Firefox. I mean, it will really make sure, because sometimes we're just like, why does this student never do this? They never look at my feedback or something. It might be because they don't see that button on their smartphone. So it's really important to try to test that out. So you got to unfortunately download the app on your own phone, open it up, do student view and see what they're seeing. For any content with audio, provide captions or transcripts, enable live transcription, or ask disability services offices to provide those services for you. You can use an accessibility checker, such as the Wave browser extension for course websites and online readings. If you're using a course LMS, most services have a built-in accessibility checker. So for Canvas, if you are editing anything, you've got your kind of like text editor window and you've got formatting options and linking stuff at the top. But at the bottom, there are a few other little options. And on the right is here for you guys. On the right, there's a little person like this, looking like the Van Gogh, no, Michelangelo guy, the man thing. Anyway, it looks like that, and that's the inbuilt accessibility checker. So you don't have to learn everything about how to make an accessible document. You just make it on your Canvas shell and you use it. It will tell you exactly what's wrong and how to fix it. All right, so the goal, this seems like a lot of work, and it really is. But once you have a system that you like, it doesn't make you, anyway, there are better ways to do it and worse ways to do it. There are lots of different accessibility checkers. In that second edition of Teach with DH, we list a bunch of them, and you just kind of have to try them out and figure out which one do you like better, because some of them make me want to tear my hair out and some of them make me say, thank God. For students, redundancy is necessary, but it can be overwhelming if the materials are not well organized. This leads to the next guiding principle: streamline the student experience. Students are overwhelmed by all the different platforms and file formats that they are expected to engage with. And think about that across 4 to 7 classes, and some of them juggling a job, juggling family responsibilities. They get very, very frustrated. Essentially, each professor presents them with a different digital habitus, right? We all have our little digital worlds, and we're asking students to engage with those. And I've been suggesting that you make it worse by jettisoning all of our assumptions and cobbling together your own idiosyncratic system. So how do we get out of that? So to be able to do this without confusing your students, try to use the same platform or tool for every lecture or for every discussion. Present all redundancy files in the same order and format in the same place on your course LMS shell, and reduce the number of times students have to click to get to something. Right? The more times they're going to click, the less likely they're actually going to go see it. Remove all unnecessary tools that you're using. So if the students go to your LMS shell and there's like 15 apps on there and you're not using them, that's confusing, right? That's information overload, right? So go and delete all the things you're not going to use so students don't have to look at it. Also, take advantage of browser extensions and plugins that allow apps and platforms to work within your CMS or your LMS itself, so that students, again, do not have to click out of that environment. Every time they click out, there's a danger they're going to go do something else instead of follow that tab that just opened. Most importantly, devote ample course time to teaching students any unusual digital tool that you expect them to use, and use scaffolding. That is, start with one small skill and build up and build up and build up. And it works best if you are doing that over an entire semester. It also includes giving them a tour of your course shell. So open Canvas and say, how often do I expect you to be on this Canvas site? Where do I find the readings? Where do I turn things in? Don't assume that students are just going to look at it and intuitively know how it's supposed to work. If answering these questions is difficult for you, you may want to redesign your courses around modularity. For a modular class, divide each class into units with the same exact requirements each in the same temporal rhythm. So for instance, in a hybrid class, In the replacement Tuesday, the Tuesday equivalent, they engage virtually with a lecture equivalent and with asynchronous discussion option. And on Thursday, they show up for a much more traditional class that's either face-to-face discussion or it's a hands-on tech tutorial. The fourth week of every one of my units is devoted completely to a major assignment. So that's like, and then I just have 3 of those, and that is my class. So students know exactly what to expect. And finally, for any modular course, the website or course shell should sort materials by that module, not by the type of thing it is, like assignments, readings, discussion. Don't organize it like that. Organize it by the module. And then inside that module contain every single thing they need. It's going to be another link to here's our Zoom lecture link. Here is a link to our course readings. It really, really helps students to make sense of the stream that you're presenting them with when they open Canvas. So basically, each unit is fully self-contained. It includes every associated everything. Just as you give your students the benefit of streamlining, you can let yourself be a specialist, not a generalist, in digital pedagogy. Because of short-term scheduling uncertainties, ongoing inequalities limiting access to financial and material resources, and intense workloads that demand efficiency and incentivize repetition, you should select software tools and modes of delivery that have the best bang for your buck. My own priority in deciding what kind of tool to use or what kind of digital assignment is what fits those course objectives. So I just stare at the course objectives for a while and think what is most organically related here. But you could also tailor your pedagogical superpower or special talent to help students succeed in their future courses. Like if you're doing an intro to the major class, right, you want to be mindful that this should be useful in other classes in the major. But you could also tailor it to helping students move towards their careers or helping your colleagues as well. If you choose skills that contribute to your departmental or institutional mission, that might help you get recognition for your efforts, get you an award, get you a grant. You might also want to choose a platform or tool so that it's going to apply to other classes you teach, to your research, to your service, or to courses you're going to teach in the future. These fringe benefits can not only boost our morale and maintain our motivation, but provide credible, concrete proof to students that these digital skills are applicable beyond this one course session or unit. Exuding this kind of credibility is crucial in digital pedagogy because we want to build student confidence when they approach new activities. They want to know that the task is authentic, that it has a connection to real life and course content, and still feel that it's a humanities course. This is particularly true for students who perceive that their choice of a major is a refuge from STEM. There are students who are like, I'm running away from this. I'm in humanities because I didn't want to do that, right? They're in the humanities because they want to play with a paper book, not because they want to be on their phone all the time. So that's why you go back to the course objectives. You don't say, well, sorry, kid, I'm going to let you be stuck in a fantasy medieval world that never existed. But, you linking it back to the course objectives will bring them back on board. For these kind of students who are resisting it, the final guideline is crucial to support the interpersonal and the intrapersonal. All right, so what does that mean? So to support the interpersonal dynamics of your class, you might follow Kathy Davidson's example and ask students at the beginning of a semester to collaboratively create a course constitution or a mission statement. You might also begin class meetings with a moment to stretch, reflect, or chat about life. Or in the middle of the class, take a short break and ask them to reflect on a discussion question before reconvening. Encourage students to refer to one another by name and make use of GroupMe, Slack, Discord channels among themselves. I stay out of these feeds because it's their space. I want them to know that I'm not nosing around. They need to be able to be honest about the course, and my presence would be disruptive. So just let them do it, So every once in a while, I'll just kind of say, oh yeah, if you guys have a GroupMe or whatever, maybe you could talk about that or something if someone needs help. And that is it. One old technology, discussion boards, can be used in creative ways, such as by including a water cooler board for non-class topics, ungraded how are you doing posts. This is especially true if you have students who are experiencing emotional problems or mental problems, right? Having an ungraded post where it's just like, I'll listen to the thing that you're writing can be very comforting for them. Obviously, don't do it if you're not in the space to provide that emotional labor. Is that the steam whistle? Yeah. You can do an FAQ, frequently asked questions, or an AMA, ask me anything, because sometimes they kind of They want to know a little bit more about you as an instructor. You can set clear boundaries. You can delete any question you don't like, but sometimes they want to know a little bit about who you are as a person or as a scholar. For small group discussions, whether virtual face-to-face, sometimes you could ask the same group of 3 to 4 students to meet once a week, every single week, so they really know that they can rely on those people. Oh God, this looks so much prettier in Keynote. I'm sorry, I should have exported this better. In terms of supporting your individual students' interpersonal well-being, I like to discuss websites and apps that are peripheral to the class. Some that might be directly or tangentially related to studying and reading, but others that offer a bit of distraction or a means for recentering, such as mindfulness apps. I'm gonna re-export this later on as a PDF for those of you who aren't going to go to a Keynote. So I'll try to remember that so you can see it in a much prettier format. Okay, so so virtual field trips are fun. So visit virtual museum webcams, zoo webcams, Twitter feeds, digital archives, or Google Arts and Culture exhibits. These could be directly related to course content, whereas a randomized Wikipedia article or virtual travel platforms like WindowSwap, Drive, and Listen, virtual zoos and aquariums more usually just offer a momentary escape from studying. Exploring the world of soundscapes through Cognitivity, Ambient Mixer, which is my favorite, Radio Garden, or the ambient atmospheres that are on YouTube can provide a new sensory dimension to the classroom environment or to study sessions. So I have a Sherlock Holmes course atmosphere that's like rain, fire, horse on cobblestone, violin playing, and I put it really quietly on some classes, and they really like it. I don't do that in classes when I know that some of my students might have a sensory issue, right? So I try to be very, very sensitive about whether I have students on the spectrum or something, they would not benefit from that kind of thing. Writing tools. Oh yeah, have you guys seen these study with me videos on YouTube? Yeah, study with me ones. I have students who use them very much to keep them motivated through study sessions. Also, there's online Pomodoro timers, Almwriter and Grammarly that do the same thing. To promote lifelong learning, I show students how to contribute to research using Zooniverse and ask them to share their own favorite intellectually minded apps and websites so that they can become more self-aware of the intellectual practices they already have, right? Because they probably have some cool skills and tricks, and it makes them feel very proud and makes them feel like they're taking control of their learning, and they can share it with each other. It's a really fun moment. So what I'm hoping with these 6 guidelines is to help provide some criteria for decision making. If you do decide to throw out all your assumptions on what's synchronous and what's asynchronous, what's digital, what's analog, all that good stuff. When you do so, you naturally want to, oh, that's terrible, I'm so sorry. When you do so, you naturally want to minimize risk and maximize reward, which is what I try to achieve by having asynchronous and synchronous course elements, solo and group learning, digital tools, and analog. And I have a balance of my autopilot favorites that I don't have to prep. I just can walk in and do it versus like one new thing in one new class that I'll try. Okay, all right, so let's get to the good stuff. What I've given you is a list of ambitions and generalizations. So here's some nuts and bolts. In my first attempt, I created a rather limited table as a model for formalizing how to balance your class. You can access this in the Google Drive. The file is a scheme for balanced class chronicity. A 4-stage continuum rates various course design choices from most asynchronous to least asynchronous. Most asynchronous to most synchronous. For the most basic strategy for balancing these elements, simply move from one row to the next and choose one element per row, but make sure you choose one and only one from each of the columns. If you do not choose any elements from the same column, you'll be fairly assured of supporting both self-directed learners and social learners and creating fair expectations about the amount of labor you'll be doing to ensure student success. A more nuanced approach, which does not restrict you to only one choice per column, adds some numbers to create a quantitative assessment meant to warn you if your class seems excessively skewed towards asynchronous means, thereby risking students' motivation and engagement over the semester, or too much towards synchronous means, which don't take advantage of efficiency gains of digital platforms and doesn't meet the needs of independent learners. For this process, you would select any option for any row that seems right to you, then use a rubric to assess whether your choices might need rethinking to meet the needs of you, your students, or your likely course delivery modality. So step one is to assign point values to each column, such as giving the fully asynchronous option 1 contact point, the enhanced asynchronous 2 points, the basic synchronous 3, and the fully synchronous 4. Once you've made your choices, you add up the point values, and then I have just kind of a series of ratings. Like if you score in this, here's kind of my qualitative assessment of what this class might be like in real life. And again, this is all in the Google folder where it's much more beautifully formatted. Of course, you should tailor this kind of rubric so that it works for you. I shared the file so you can go in and change the things so that it actually matches the kind of course decisions you would actually make yourself. This is just a model, it's just a prototype, and you can go and edit it as you see fit. The final step is to repeat the picking and scoring process until you're satisfied that the numerical score tallies with what your understanding is for what's best for you and your students in that exact class. So this is limited for a few reasons. The course elements, this list is not complete. It was just my first try. Yes, you can download it and change it, but I wanted to do something a little bit more. It also kind of assumes that asynchronous means correlate with less student engagement. So it's a little bit tipped in the balance. So I was like, okay, how do I fix this? So I decided to try to find a formalized scheme that's a little bit more open-ended, less reliant on imperfect correlations. I expanded the 4 course elements to 14. So like what kind of activities, what kind of traditional assignments, what kind of DH project, what kind of icebreakers, what's a first day activity, that kind of stuff. So I increased these 4 to 14 and then the number of options from 4 to 6. So now you have 84 options to choose from. So I created a spreadsheet that you can access in Google Drive. The spreadsheet converts the idea into something we can do more things with than just looking at a picture of a table. Rather than brainstorm individual options to specifically fit one category of chronicity, I mulled through attractive options that I would actually use in my classes, and then I scored them from 1 to 5 along these 3 characteristics. Chronicity, that is how little or how much flexibility students are offered in engaging in tasks, and how much flexibility you too are given for arranging when to grade or when to prepare materials, all that good stuff. That's the first one. Second one is active learning. How much responsibility are students taking for their learning with this choice, and how much does it connect to their real lives? And third, teacher effort. And this is a relative, not absolute amount. So like basically of the 6 options that I kind of brainstormed out, which seems to me to involve least effort and which to be the most. Okay. So to mix and match these 84 options across 14 course elements, I created a course randomizer in which JavaScript functions randomize the choices across these dimensions to yield automatic course templates. And then it goes and grabs the values from the spreadsheet, which I exported as a CSV in order to create a score for you again. All right, so JavaScript allows you to randomize your choices. That obviously doesn't reflect any kind of intentionality. That's supposed to inform the balancing of synchronous and asynchronous element. But what I do like is that the serendipitous feel of randomization helps us unlearn our assumptions about the relationships among synchronicity, active learning, and teacher effort. With the randomizer, you can either leverage this serendipity to just generate baselines that you can then edit on your own, or you can click on individual course elements that you like, retaining them in your template even after you press the randomizer button again. I then assigned these 84 values a score of 1 to 5, not limited to integers. So like I did it like quarter points, essentially, across these 3 dimensions. So once I had that score, the scores across each of these 3 dimensions are calculated. To make it more human readable, I converted the numerical averages in order of a range: very low, somewhat low, medium, somewhat high, very high. And then based on these 15 possible scores that you received, I provide an assessment of the options and recommendations of how to improve it. And that's only if you think that there's kind of something that you would like to do differently. The easiest way to get to the course randomizer is to type teachdh.com, which will redirect you to my GitHub web companion for the DH book. If you go to access the course randomizer, press click here. It's fine, I promise. It's my link rerouting is making some browsers think that I'm doing something wrong, but I promise I am not trying to steal anything from you. You can trust my website. I'm not tracking anything. I am not harvesting Bitcoin. There's nothing going on there. Okay, all right, so here's the course randomizer. So all the fields are empty because we haven't done anything yet. So click generate a course plan, and it just gives you random options. And then if you keep scrolling, at the bottom, you can see what your results are. So this randomized one, somewhat high synchronicity, somewhat high active learning, somewhat low teaching effort. This seems to me like the active learning versus teaching effort sounds like magic. So there's some good stuff going on with this random scheme. But synchronicity being high might not suit your delivery mode at that time. All right, so let's say that, because this is almost perfect, I am going to save some of these. So I click on the text for the ones I want to save. And then when I click, those ones remain the same over time. And you can go down and look at your score and see if that has affected your scores. All right, so this is flawed for a few reasons too. The options I give you are incomplete. There are more than 6 ways to hold office hours, or so I'm told. Right, or 6 more ways to add DH projects. And you might disagree with the teacher effort score that I've given. It might take you more or less time than something. So yeah, this is just a rough kind of prototype. Okay, so if you are like, these disagreements are going to limit the usefulness of this for you, you can actually go in and tweak the randomizer for you. So if you go to my GitHub user page, just github.com/Shawna Ross, go to the TeachDH repository and then the DH course plan directory, go to the JSON data file, and then change it from there. Well, fork it first. Don't try to push changes to my GitHub repo. But anyway, you can basically duplicate that and change it as much as you want. But if you're unfamiliar with GitHub and JavaScript, you can customize it by downloading the spreadsheet instead, right? Because probably a spreadsheet is more familiar. And from that point, you can change your course elements yourself, and you can use color coding or spreadsheet functions in order to get the scores for you. In the future, I hope to add some more features, like letting people add their own suggestions. So you can actually go in and type one in and add your own scores. Or do it more like a selector mode where you get a drop-down menu and you consciously choose them instead of going through the randomizer. But I do like the element of serendipity because it asks you to let go of your own assumptions, right? You have to start completely anew. But perhaps the most serious problem with randomization is that the selection of certain course elements will affect your selection of course elements downstream, as it were. In regular course planning, you don't choose each course element independently, but in tandem with other course elements. Theoretically, I could introduce these relationships into my data, creating dependencies that show how course design, when considered as a data structure, is more of an ecosystem than it is a list. This ecosystem would then inform the process that a user goes through as you click through course elements. So certain choices would trigger changes dynamically in your web browser that shows you how one choice has affected the wisdom or not wisdom of other choices you might make. So the generator could even provide a little pop-up, a polite warning, or maybe it could even block it completely. I haven't decided how aggressive I'm going to make it. But the aggressive option does strike me as a bit too nosy and domineering. It's better to risk randomness than foreclose experimentation. Thank you.
Questions for Dr. Ross?
I'm curious if there's a tool like one of the ones that you sent over the workshops, Today Tomorrow, Shawna, or Leo, or something like that you found the most useful in your classes, or if there's other ones that you rely on to go to tools. So there's so many interesting ideas. I'm just kind of curious what's the right tool for you.
Oh, I think it really just is whatever your imagination wants to go to. For my own stuff, I like to go through mapping and then digital text creation. So I have students make their own digital editions using GitHub and Jekyll and Markdown. But those are because those particular ways of creating technologies delight me, and they create objects that matter to me and matter to my courses. So because I'm in English literature, that's why me kind of focusing on using minimal computing to help students make digital editions, that just makes sense for like where I'm at, unfortunately. So but Voyant is a tried and true, like pop it into any class that has some kind of primary text. And it really is wonderful to work with. Trying to think if I have any other kind of thing that I love using, but I thought it was not. I'll have to keep thinking about it.
You talk about redundancy and then you talk about like having modules. Oh, sorry. So you talk about, so especially in online courses, on Canvas. So I designed it module wise, but I also had like assignments and readings. I just wanted your opinion on whether that's, because to me, that was accessible, but is that over information? I don't know. I mean, that's what, when you were talking about it, that's what my thought was.
So for my classes, I do like to go and edit that menu on the left and actually have it into the 3 or 4 units or modules that I've arranged into my classes. So I really do like editing it. But a different way that you could achieve this without trying to make Canvas do what it doesn't want to do is on that home page, instead of making the home page the same thing as your syllabus, instead of just be a day-to-day schedule. And that day-to-day schedule would have any links that they need to go to. So even if you do have all of those additional menu items on the left, really all they need is that one home screen.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll really take it. Do that. Thank you very much. So, I would imagine that like one obstacle to incorporating DH tools into a class is indeed the instructional time needed to teach the tool. And so I guess I was wondering if you'd say a few more words about how you integrate instruction and tools into classes that, I don't know, maybe about literary modernism or, you know, some sort of like humanities topic, right? It's not as it were a DH class, but it's like a class that has DH in it, as it were, which I think is implicit in what you're talking about. So like, how do you find, what are some of the best ways to build in instruction or tools into your class? Does that make sense?
Sure. In my normal go-to method is that I will have a kind of course rhythm where I'll have one class that is the first unit of a class will be actually lecture materials. I just give them historical background or aesthetic data or philosophical terms. And then the next 2 days are discussion. The day after that is a tutorial where I demonstrate using a technology in front of them. And then this is like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday kind of chunky class. And then the next 2 days is a hands-on workshop where the students are in usually a library computer classroom. And I'm just floating around the classroom, you know, working with them and helping them to troubleshoot. So lecture, discussion, tutorial, workshops, and that's just kind of the rhythm that I have. But of course, there are some tools that don't require as much forethought as others. So I'm not sure if it's trying to make that top menu go away. Come on, Zoom. Just trying to get it under more. Okay. Well, look what I've done. I've resized my window. Okay, under the more, and I can just make it go away.
I'm floating meeting control.
Cool, thank you. And I know we do have a question in the chat box. I will get to you in just a sec.
It really is. It's deep.
Oh, thank you. Oh my God, thank you. Thank you. So I hate to shill stuff, but again, this is free. I'm giving you the link. So in our chapters on class activities, the organization rationale is based on how long it's going to take the class to learn it. So you can kind of see 10-minute exercises, half-hour exercises, whole week long. So that tries to be like basically like how much time do you have, and of those, here are the tools that match the amount of time that you're able to give to it. So usually if it's an upper level class or something where I want a nice deliverable, I want a student to have a beautiful object, whether it's a group thing or not, then I will do that careful scaffolding. And we do like once a unit, a new technical skill will be introduced that will then build up to the last one. But you do not have to do that to bring in DH. You can just do these 10-minute exercises that really on your part only require you to spend about 15 minutes clicking around yourself until you feel confident that you know the functionality of that tool. And some people are saying earlier today that there are so many good YouTube tutorials. Like, you know, just watch a few and eventually you'll start to feel a little bit more comfortable and empowered to go and start clicking on things.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first is I'm curious if you've ever let your students play with the analyzer.
Oh no, oh no. That would empower them almost too much. No, I actually haven't let the students click through the randomizer.
I don't know if you can see what like they would like almost report feedback. Wait. Okay, so the next question is
That's great, thank you.
I'm totally haunted by those. What was your slide? It's called more, not more, like this. Because I know you're right, and I dislike it. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I teach this class on the history of rhetoric. And first of all, how do you teach the history of rhetoric in 15 weeks to begin with? Second of all, like, as I've over the years included less and less in that course, I thought the course had gotten better. But then I don't sleep as well at night because I feel like, you know, the whole getting left out. And so my question is, does like this sort of dovetails with John's question, but does DH exacerbate that problem? Like if I try and add a tool for this already busy class, when one of my guiding principles is that more is not more, like there has to be like, I don't know, it's just anxiety in the house.
Yeah, there's definitely a trade-off. And every time I have been on the brink of doing something fun and new, and then I get scared and remove it, I always regret it. Every single time, I'm like, I really wish I would have put that back. Of course, the desire for breadth, of course, is an unslakable thirst. You know, we will always want to include more and more and more content. So in that sense, that's a goal we can never really reach. And then it also, sometimes it plays into canonicity as well, you know, because you've got to teach. If you feel like you have to teach something, it's usually going to revolve around the usual suspects, you know. So I find that controlling that impulse has good results in other kind of domains. So yeah, my Sherlock Holmes class is becoming a little shell of itself. But I'm certain that the concepts that are important to me, the ones that are left, the students really seem to understand it, rather than me constantly trying to chase that. Oh, but this story is really good too. I can't believe I had to. And then of course it also depends on your audience too. If these are like students who are already kind of majors in comm, and you think that they're going to be graduate students and they're not going to be able to write a sample letter for graduate admissions without having a pretty good spread, you know, then those are the people to go to. But if it's, you know, non-majors, I mean, that's more of a situation where it's good to kind of confront them with something fun and new that will change their idea of your discipline. And I think the trade-off there is really worth it. I wonder if there's a way where you could choose the kind of tools in the way that you teach them so that it satisfies whatever goal you have in another way. Like there was a question about like what kind of tools would be fun to use in a language classroom, and I thought about Google Translate, not because it's a good tool, because it's a bad one. You know, so you can have students click around and do a game of telephone, you know, like turning in one translation and feeding it back into a different translation and watching the mistakes that happen and the weird effects that happen and glitches essentially. And that could have replaced secondary reading from a scholar who's talking about the inadequacy of these kind of automated translation tools. Thank you. That's a great question too. So what I have found feedback from students is that it's always the tools that are deliberately to engage student peer collaboration and peer contacts, people talking to each other. So in an online class, I wouldn't say necessarily this is a great time for a coordinated project that I like. I would say, what tools can I use to create more of a sense of synchronicity? So for example, Perusall, which is a plugin that you can get seamlessly into Canvas, allows for student annotation, not just in text form, but audio and video types of annotations, that kind of adding social annotation. That's more of a way of not introducing new activity or assignment, but just creating a different modality for doing something you've already been doing with this classroom discussion. So the best feedback I've gotten is, again, just platforms that are about communication, feedback, and then the all of those little like that intrapersonal slide. The students have absolutely loved talking about audioscapes and thinking about what is the intellection of sound and how does that impact the way we study and learn. Where is Zoom?
It's that far back.
Thank you. All right. Okay, I don't, wait, let me scroll back. I do not see any questions. Is that right? Okay.
Question.
Yes.
So I know that you're working with English and I guess you're working with like large chunks of technical, that's what I'm pretty helpful. But I teach like a beginner language class and foreign language, which is French, and we don't have students having necessary English language.
Right.
Yeah. The tool that you would recommend, particularly to teach grammar. Like
Interesting.
just things that have like PH in my classroom.
So the question of not having content, not having your raw data to work on, there are a few scanning apps that have inbuilt OCR, optical character recognition, so that you can use your smartphone's camera feature and essentially get a plain text file out of it. So if your students have a French text in front of them, they can point their phones at it and pretty quickly create a plain text that they could then put into Voyant or something like that. And I believe there's no reason why Voyant wouldn't work. If you still have the Roman character set, it should still work mostly the same. I would hate to see what would happen with ones that use Cyrillic, for example. But that would be one example that might work. Really new iPhones have inbuilt quick OCR where you start aiming your camera at, but it's very, very limited. So that's why I kind of like Office Lens. Microsoft Office Lens is one that a lot of people like. My favorite is called Real Scanner Pro, which I mentioned in the book. But you can also use Google Docs as well. So this is just a fun little trick. If you download a PDF file or even a PNG or TIFF, so an image file. So if someone has created a picture of text, you download that into your Google Drive. But then once you've downloaded it, right click, open it in Google Docs, and there will be like an options menu. And if you go through the options, it will say set character recognition. So essentially you put a picture of a text onto Google Drive, open it in Google Docs, and it will give you that plain text that then you can play with. And if your students do have smartphones, like my favorite again is Scanner Pro. It's $2.99. So like, is there a possibility to get a micro grant and somehow like, or to borrow a library set of iPads that you have put Scanner Pro on and have every student do 10 pages? You have 35 students. Now you have 350 pages of data that you can work with. And that's really, really fun. I've done that in workshops before, and it's always the moment when you put all that plain text together. People are like, it's really fun.
Please join me in saying thank you, Dr. Shawna.
Thank you for having me.